Joining us today. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for this presentation. We really appreciate being a part of this wonderful event. This is our third time, I believe, or maybe fourth time participating. So thank you, MSRP, for having us here. Um, we will be going through a lot of material. I do recommend that everyone put any questions that they may have in the chat so that we can get to it towards the end. And that way we can make sure to answer everybody's questions. I may be asking a couple questions throughout the presentation. So if I do, please do feel free to write in something in the chat in that moment. But we will go ahead and get started. So for those of you who do not know us, Cash Campaign of Maryland is a nonprofit organization based in Baltimore City, but we operate throughout the entire state of Maryland. CASH is an acronym which stands for Creating Assets, Savings, and Hope. And our mission, the reason that we exist, is to promote economic advancement for low to moderate income individuals and families in Baltimore and across Maryland. We have a number of different programs. So first, most people know us from our free tax preparation program. So we work with a number of partners across the state in order to provide free tax preparation during tax season. We just finished our back tax clinic. We will be starting preparing taxes again in January, early February. You can check our website, cashmd.org, to get more information. We also do financial education workshops and conferences. We conduct benefit screening for up to about 23 different public benefits. So if you or someone you know is experiencing a financial downturn and needs help applying for those benefits, this would be a good way to get connected in one place. We have free unlimited virtual financial coaching, which you can also find on our website. Financial fitness fairs, including our biggest fair, Money Power Day in March. Maryland Cash Academy. So here you see the website, mdcashacademy.org. If you were in need of additional financial education classes or just wanted to learn more, we have classes from staff, including a lot of really reliable, wonderful partners who have free virtual and in-person classes. We also do advocacy and policy, and we have a Bank on Maryland program for those who are trying to find information about banks and credit unions in their area. Again, I would recommend that you go to our website, cashmd.org, in order to get connected to all of those programs and services. So today we're going to really start with understanding the statistics and trends of consumer scams today and what is actually happening. Then we will take a moment to talk about vulnerability. So what makes people and machines vulnerable to scams and cyber attacks, how to protect your information online, and then what are the leading agencies that are protecting consumers and the steps that you can take if you are a victim of scams or fraud and where to report. So we want to start by just kind of grounding ourselves in what is happening right now. So every year, the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, puts out a data book, which is with the Consumer Sentinel Network. That is basically law enforcement officers from local to state to federal level all pull data together related to fraud. So cashmd.org is the name of the organization that's presenting. Thank you, Edna. So consumer financial fraud is when a person suffers a financial loss involving the use of deceptive, misleading, or other illegal practices. So that's really what we're going to be focused on today. As you can see, they pull together all of this data, create a pretty large data book that you all can access if you're interested in looking at it. But we wanted to pull some kind of key statistics here. So in 2024, there were about 6.5 million reports. The top three categories were related to credit bureau and information furnishers, identity theft, and imposter scams. And out of those, about 2.6 million fraud reports, there was a 38% reported a loss, which was about $12.5 billion in losses. It's important to recognize that everyone can be affected by this. So oftentimes people think that this is only something that is happening to seniors. Younger people actually reported losing money to fraud more often than older people. From age 20 to 29, there was a 44% of those who put in reports. 70 to 79, there was 24% who made reports. But you will see that there tends to be a higher loss the older the person is. So those who were 80 plus, that median loss was around $1,650. So if you imagine some of these folks are living on Social Security payments and potentially a pension, maybe not, that can be a really significant loss. When we look at the numbers over time, there was a big jump during COVID. When COVID happened, it kind of started going down. But in this last year, we've actually found there to be almost $1 million dollar increase in the losses. So there was a very, very big jump this year. So we just want to make sure that people are aware that this continues to be an issue that you need to be aware of. When it comes to identity theft, we're talking about something very specific. So this is all fraud, but it includes identity theft. So for identity theft, we're talking about situations where someone's identity has been used for basically so when someone's identity has been used without their permission to commit fraud or theft, and oftentimes this will be connecting names, addresses, credit cards, social security numbers, bank account numbers, medical insurance account numbers. So many people don't know that actually Medicare numbers can be used for identity theft. So we want to make sure that we're keeping all of these things very secure. For Maryland, this is looking at the most recent quarters, the projected amounts as of June. There were about 55,000 alerts and about $116.7 million in losses. Identity theft was the highest reported category. And we do want to remember that only about 15% of people actually report. So the losses that we see here are pretty limited in that many more people are actually experiencing these losses than what we see here. So when it comes to identity theft, when it comes to financial fraud, when we're talking about scams and cybersecurity, we really are trying to get to the crux of what these people want from us. And this, at different points of time, may have been more simple. Now it really has become a business for a lot of people. And it is a business of getting your information, whether it's a bank account, investment account, credit cards, cash, getting those personal identifiable information, social security, name, address, phone, tax documents, other people's information, or really any kind of data that's important to them, or getting access to their computer in order to increase those. So I'll see a couple questions and we'll be going through and answering those at the end. So when we're talking about vulnerability, the things that make us the most vulnerable are both our psychology and physical machinery. So we want to make sure that we're addressing both. With the psychology, we're talking about the environmental and emotional factors. So this can be stressful life events, less social and family support, stronger emotions, and people who are targeted by scammers. So oftentimes, if you have been a victim of a scam, your information will be shared so that others can go ahead and get that information and scam you again and again and again. Something when it comes to cybersecurity that we need to be really aware of is social engineering. So social engineering is the tactic of manipulating, influencing, or deceiving a victim in order to gain control over a computer system or to steal that personal financial information. And this really is tying into that psychological piece. So it's using psychological manipulation to trick users into making security mistakes, giving away that sensitive information. And they go by a playbook. So when it comes to those social engineering attacks, it's almost always the same thing. So you have the pretext, right? The lie that they tell to get you enthralled, to get you connected. The appeal. So they are eliciting a strong emotion and trying to promote you to take some kind of action. An artificial time constraint. So they'll often say, you have to do this right now. This is emergency. This is urgent. They give you a call to action. They are telling you to do something, to give them money in a certain way. So oftentimes, one way that you can tell if something isn't on the up and up is the fact that they will ask for this information in a very specific way, right? So they'll often ask for crypto or gift cards, wire transfer, sometimes um, peer-to-peer methods of uh, of distributing those funds, right? Like Venmo, Cash App, et cetera, because they are trying to find ways that are going to be a little bit more difficult for you to get your money back. And then isolation. So they will often ask you to not tell anyone and not let anybody know so that you won't have anyone potentially telling you that, hey, this can potentially be a scam. Um, and one of the big things that they're doing when they do this is that they're making you engage in cognitive tunneling, right? So the idea is that one example would be if you were out taking a walk, everything is beautiful. You see the plants, you see the sun, you see the a little deer, whatever, out in the woods. If a bear started running at you, all you're going to see is that bear, right? You're going to ignore or not even be able to see everything else about around you. And that's really what they're doing. They're trying to get you into that space where you are almost in crisis, where you can see nothing else. You don't see the red flags. You just see that you have to act urgently in that moment, and you will go forward and do whatever it is that they want you to do. So when it comes to the physical vulnerabilities, I want you all to take a look at this image. This is from CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. But I want you all to take a moment and look at this image and tell me what you think could be hacked. So feel free to use that chat, and we will be going back to the questions. But if anyone who is logged on, feel free to take a moment to just let me know, just put in the chat what items in this image you think could be hacked. All right, so we have a lot of good answers. We have router, any and all smart devices, TV using Wi-Fi, yep, television, camera, router on the table. So very good. So basically everything you all said, anything that is potentially connected to the internet, including that router, those are all of the things that could potentially be hacked. So we have the Wi-Fi router, the smart speakers, the camera, the smart TV, the tablet, any potential smart appliances, and any phones. So all of these things are things that could make us potentially vulnerable. We'll be talking about how to secure and how to protect yourself after we talk about scams for a little bit. But you want to be aware of everything. So this is also called the Internet of Things or your surface area. So you want to be aware of all of the things that are connected and are potentially hackable. So both the emotional, psychological, but then also the machinery piece of things. Um, when we're talking about these vulnerabilities, like we said, you will see things like phishing, vishing, or smishing. So if anyone has heard of any of these terms, can you tell me what you think they are in the chat? Phishing, vishing, or smishing? If anybody has any idea what phishing or smishing. Very good. Exactly. So you guys did a really good job of kind of writing out some of these things are. So these are all different ways that scammers can use to get to you, to ask you for information, to get that information from you. And yes, phishing is what most people had heard of in the past. Phishing is via email. So if you think of literally phishing for information, they are doing that with email. So often it's using email or malicious websites. They're soliciting personal information. They can, yes, the fake request for support, all of those things. They can solicit the personal information. They can pose as someone who's trustworthy. So one thing that we've seen before is, for example, Amazon or Venmo or anyone is emailing you to tell you that something is happening, something is wrong with your password. They need you to update more information, and you see that Amazon is spelled wrong, or you are getting that email, but it's not from the company. So, but in the past, you would be able to really see it because there was poor grammar and misspellings. With the advent of AI and the way that AI is being used, you see less and less of that. But this is something to be really aware of. So getting an email that's asking for immediate action from a company related to something that you don't know anything about, it could be potentially a phishing attack. Vishing is using voice. So this is something where they could entice the victim to call a certain number and divulge sensitive information, or they could be telling you to to just tell them something when they call you. One thing to be aware of is that there is something where you can easily spoof a caller ID. So oftentimes I get calls on my cell all the time that say, potential spam call, right? But sometimes they can spoof a call. So I had BG&E call me, for example. One of my infamous scam calls was BG&E calling me, telling me I am Hispanic, telling me in Spanish that if I didn't pay a certain amount of money, ICE would be outside my house, right? So they were trying to use whatever scare tactics, right, they could to put me in a crisis situation, and then assuming that I was behind or calling enough people that could potentially be behind, right? So that's something that happened to me. I obviously hung up the phone, called BG&E, and let them know the scam was happening. But these are things that happen to folks, so we need to be aware of them. Right. So in that situation, if someone's calling you like that, you would hang up and call the actual company. And smishing would be text messages. So here we have, does that include fake generated AI voices? It can, right? So you can get those fake generated AI, and we'll talk about that in a slide or two, in the next slide actually, about the AI scams that we've seen. And smishing is text. So I'm sure a lot of you have gotten, I know I have gotten the employment scams, gotten the scams related to well, all different kinds of things, but there's employment. There was also a scam going around about tolls, right? So these things that are coming at us pretty regularly via text message. So we just want to be really clear and aware. Another thing that happens often that we all need to be aware of is that when something is happening politically, a natural disaster, anything like that, you're going to get scams related to that as well. So during elections, you'll get scams for people asking for money. During natural disasters, like when Hurricane Katrina happened, for example, a lot of people got emails related to that asking for money. When there are when it's time to do your taxes, you'll see IRS scams coming through. So you just need to be aware of what's happening politically, because that's going to be a little bit more, going forward. Yes, the text regarding a purchase that you didn't make, good example, or the UPS delivery that you don't have coming, right? So all of those things are examples of where you just want to delete, report, and move on. You don't want to respond. You don't want to talk to them. There's even messages where someone just texts you saying hi, right? They're just trying to get you to give them some information. Um, what you'll see sometimes is they'll just want one piece of information because they can put all of these different pieces of information together, right? Your date of birth from one place, your address from another, something else from another place, right? So you want to be clear on who you're giving what information to. Somebody mentioned the AI voice cloning. So this is very real. I've taught classes to young people who've told me that they've already experienced this, where their brother, one had a brother, one had another in another class. It was a young woman where somebody had used their voice, taken, lifted their voice from social media. It's not hard. And basically created a script using some software and then called their parents because all of their information was on social media. So they knew everything. They knew who their parents were. They knew the phone, they were able to get everything and contacted a family member asking for money in order because they had kidnapped the child. So in these situations, this is possible. This does happen. And it's not just someone who sounds like it, they're actually using potentially a child's voice. So in these situations, they really do follow that script. You're contacted out of the blue, you're pressured to act immediately. They're trying to put you into that space where you're getting run over by that bear, right? Where you're terrified and don't know what you're doing. They are asking in the specific way, right? So the wire transfer, gift cards, payment app, crypto, they're requesting personal private information, and you are told to keep everything quiet and keep it a secret. So how do you protect yourself from this specifically is using a family code word, right? If anything were to happen to anyone in your family or your close friends, you all have a series of words that you put together. If you get a video or a call using AI, does that have your family code word in it? Don't use this, but for example, you could say pineapple, eraser, banana, right? Or any combination of words or phrase that if that is not in the video, if that is not in the voice, you know it's not them. Also trying to make sure that you don't panic and calm down, and then getting in touch with the family member directly. So oftentimes a lot can be avoided if you just call or text that person. We have seen that sometimes individuals will do this when during the school day or during the work day when someone may not have access to their phone. So that can happen. So you need to be aware of that. But also that family code word and really not panicking can really make a difference in terms of knowing what it is that isn't happening. Sometimes, even though you've done everything that you can, your information can get out there, right? Through something like an information security breach. So in those situations, oftentimes you'll see, you might get those letters that say your information has been breached. You might get an email, you might get something. You might be concerned, is that or is that not a scam? So I will go into right now talking about how you can protect yourself and what you can actually do. So when it comes to protecting yourself against those social engineering attacks, they want you to be isolated. So you want to talk to a trusted friend. If you ever have a concern that something might be a scam or sounds too good to be true, talk to someone, right? Don't give out information or act on inbound calls unless it's just they're returning your call. If you called someone and they're returning your call, okay, potentially. But if someone's just calling you asking for that information, don't give it out. And learn and know the patterns and red flags, right? So Social Security is probably not going to call you, right? The IRS is not calling you. All these people are going to send you letters. And then if in the letter they said they need to call you for some reason, that'll be there, right? But you're not probably going to get an unexpected call out of the blue from one of these agencies. If somebody's threatening to arrest you, just threatening you in general, then this might be a social engineering attack. And anytime anyone is trying to isolate you, that is a time that this is not on the up and up if somebody is actually trying to isolate you and make sure that you don't speak to anyone else. So these are some of the things you want to kind of be aware of and connected to as you move forward. As far as your cybersecurity hygiene, I think all of us know at this point we want to use strong words. Ideally, a password manager to generate those strong and store those unique passwords. If you don't want to do that, you can do passphrases. You can have an entire sentence that is unique, that is strange, and use different characters, different numbers for different things, right? So the word Joe could be a capital J, the number 0, and the number 3, like not anybody related to you in your family or anything like that. But let's say you make a sentence with a fake person and you include all of those different variations. But again, a password manager might be more helpful just because all of us have so many passwords these days. You want to implement multi-factor authentication, right? So like if they can send you a text to make sure it's you, you want to update your software, turn on automatic updates. A lot of times those software updates are actually security patches. So if you don't believe in automatic updates, that's fine. You just need to make sure that you're very clear when it's going to be updated and take action almost immediately. Otherwise, you want to make them automatic. You want to be very careful on what you're clicking on because more than 90% of cyber attacks start with those phishing emails. And you want to be careful with what you're sharing. Think before posting things online, make your accounts private. You do make yourself more vulnerable with the more information that you share. So for example, if you want to share pictures of a vacation, maybe share it when you come home. Don't say that you're on your way out and leaving your house unattended, right? We want to be careful with what we're putting out there. As far as the physical items, right, that we were talking about earlier, you can actually have a unique password for each device that you have in your home that is connected to the internet. You can often do two-factor authentication, and you should do that whenever possible for each of those devices. All of these devices are going to have software updates, so you want to make sure that you're keeping up with those updates. And then you want to research connected devices before use. Sometimes we want to have the most up-to-date thing the moment it comes out. Sometimes it can benefit us to wait a little bit just so that we can make sure that they are getting all the bugs, doing all of the things. And make sure you're disabling and disconnecting something you're not using. So if you still have something in your house, but you're not using it anymore, make sure that you disconnect it. The router is also the first place, right? That's where everything comes in. So you want to make sure that you're paying attention to any updates there when it comes to those routers. As far as information security breaches, up until very recently, there wasn't really much that we could do outside of just knowing if you actually were a victim of an information or security breach. So there was this law called the Maryland Personal Information Protection Act, or PIPA. It went into effect January 2008. And this basically requires companies that are maintaining electric records containing personal identifiable information to notify residents if their information is compromised. So they are required to let you know. If you get a letter in the mail or an email, that might be why. You can actually check the Maryland Attorney General's website, and I provided a PDF of these slides so that they can be shared with participants. But you can go to their website and actually check and see what security breaches have gone out, what has happened, to kind of be clear on everything that is going on so that you know if something has happened. A new law that has just come into place is the Maryland Online Data Privacy Act of 2024. So this law really begins October 2025, but it's going to apply to processing activities that take place on or after April 1st, 2026. It's unique and very strong. It's a very strong data privacy law. So it applies to businesses that operate in Maryland or target Maryland residents and meet either of the following thresholds. So they have to either control or process the personal data of 35,000 consumers annually. And that's excluding something that's solely for payment transactions. And they have to derive over 20% of the gross revenue from the sale of derive over 20% of gross revenue from the sale of personal data and the control process of personal data, 10,000 consumers. So the reason why this is a huge deal is because the less your data is out there, um, and if you say, no, I don't want you to sell my data, and you actually have a right to do that now, the less likely it is for your data to be compromised and for someone to have access to it. So even the biggest companies are at risk of being breached. So again, the least data that's collected, stored, or sold, the less data that's at risk. So there are a couple of things that this law does. So one thing is that you have a right to access your personal data, to correct any inaccuracies, to delete personal data, and the right to data portability, which means that it can be shifted from place to place. Again, this goes into effect in April, but it's important to kind of know how this works. And you have the right to opt out. So you can say, no, I don't want targeted advertising. I don't want you to sell my personal data. And this is a little bit difficult, and I will explain that you're opting out of profiling for decisions that produce legal or similarly significant effects. So right now, oftentimes when we do things and we just say, okay, accept, we're allowing people to sell our personal data. And personal data can be anything that kind of connects the data to an individual. It can be your date of birth, it can be your social security number, your location, what car you own, any of those things. Anything that could be used to identify you is personal data. But under this law, it also means things that can be grouped together, right? So let's say somebody has my initials are CF, they know what college I went to, they knew the year that I graduated. All of that together would be personal data because you could put together who the person is, right? So it can either be those individual things like name, address, social security number, location, but also things that you wouldn't necessarily think of as personal data that when grouped together identify you. So for, again, the example, my initials, the college I went to, the year that I graduated, all of that together would be personal data. So when it says profiling and furtherance of decisions that produce legal or similarly significant effects, what we're talking about here is these automated processing of personal data that look at the person's characteristics based on the personal data, and then they have an evaluation that takes place. And it can affect things like housing or insurance, access to financial services, even things like denial of a credit or auto loan application, determining eligibility for job opportunities, determining whether or not you can get housing or certain kinds of insurance for your house, right? These are decisions that are made from information that's been sold that has nothing to do with whatever thing you're opting into, right? So Maryland is saying we're not doing that anymore. We're not operating in the wild, wild west. We're going to have some regulations and controls here. So because of that, they have these data minimization requirements. So the controller, which is the person who has your data, right, can only collect and process personal data that is reasonably necessary and proportionate for the disclosed purpose. So if I'm just on your app to play solitaire, you don't need to know my location. You don't need to know my health information. You don't need to know any of those things, right? So you can opt out of that, and they can only, going after April, they can only collect and process the data that's reasonably necessary and proportionate for whatever purpose. Okay, so that's one. Two is that the process or selling of personal data of a consumer where the controller knows or should know that the consumer is under the age of 18 is for the purposes of targeted advertising is prohibited. So if the company should know that someone is underage, that they are under 18, they are not allowed to sell their data for targeted advertising, period. And then they can only collect, process, or share sensitive data if it is strictly necessary to provide the service. And sensitive data would be could be like health-related data, and then also personal data about children under the age of 18, right? So any personal data around a child under the age of 18 cannot be sold period. It can't be sold for any reason, for anything, even if it is actually needed for the service, it cannot be sold. Any sensitive data cannot be sold without exception. If they need to collect it or use it in order to provide you with that service, sensitive data has to be specifically for that service. But going forward, they cannot sell that data, period. So even if you say they're allowed to, they can't. There is no exception. So this is, I think, one of the strongest data privacy acts that has been passed in the country. So starting in April 2026, and you may have seen it already popping up in your phone where you're having these, requests. Do you want to opt in? Do you want to opt out? You really do have the option of opting out of a lot of these things. And some of these things are just no longer an option for these companies. So this is a really important piece of taking care of yourself, is making sure that you are opting out so that these companies do not have access to all of your data. So earlier there was a question around identity theft, right? So like, what do you do? And if having your reports, I believe somebody asked if having a credit freeze would stop identity theft. So a credit freeze would stop an individual from potentially opening credit in your name. And that's what a credit freeze does. But if you think that you might have been a victim of identity theft, you would want to get in contact with your credit card company, banks, any other financial institutions, change all of your passwords. You want to check your credit reports. So annualcreditreport.com is the federal government website where you can check your credit reports for Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. So you'd want to check all three. As of right now, you can still check them every week. We'll talk about fraud alert and credit freezes in a moment. You'd also want to file a police report with the non-emergency number. Again, they may not be able to do anything in the moment, but it's giving some heft to your complaint. You can file with the Consumer Protection Agencies or the Federal Trade Commission. I strongly encourage people to file with the Attorney General has an identity theft unit, which is amazing, and we'll talk about that in a moment, and starting that dispute with any companies about fraudulent activity. So again, the fraud alerts and credit freezes do different things. The fraud alert basically makes it so that any lender has to verify your identity before granting you credit in your name. Credit freezes are a bit stronger, right? So they restrict access to your credit report to help prevent identity theft. And you'll usually need like a PIN or a password to place or lift the freeze, and you can lift the freeze for moments and put it back on. And this is something that is free, that is available. There are different kinds of credit freezes, especially if you've already been a victim of identity theft. You might be able to get it for a longer period of time. But what you would want to do here is a little bit different. So for the fraud alert, you would place it on one of the credit bureaus, and they're supposed to tell the other two. I personally recommend still reaching out to all three: Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. For the credit freezes, you have to contact all three. You don't have a choice. And you let them know that you need to put on that credit freeze. And it really can help in terms of that financial fraud piece, because nobody can open anything, any kind of loan, anything like that, while you have that credit freeze. So for the credit bureau contacts, again, you all will have access to this, but you can go on their website or call Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, again, to put on that fraud alert or that credit freeze. So where can you report? There are a number of different places to report. So like we said before, the Federal Trade Commission has identitytheft.gov. It's really great because it can set you up with a recovery plan. You kind of go through a series of pages where they ask you questions about what happened, and they kind of tell you what you can do. And it's pretty robust. So this is a place that I definitely recommend that folks go if they have experienced identity theft. The Maryland Attorney General's office has a really great identity theft unit, but you can also go to their consumer Their consumer, here, let me point this out for a second. They have a consumer protection division where you can do the identity theft, but also for anything else, any other kind of fraud. And you can get in touch with them, make a report, make a complaint, let them know what's happening and how they can help you move forward. And this is the website specifically, but as we said, you guys will get a PDF of the slides for their consumer protection division, but also they have that identity theft unit that is very specific only to that if you have been a victim of identity theft. So if you want to report fraud more generally, the FTC has reportfraud.ftc.gov. This is really important because if there is something that is happening across the board or affecting a larger number of people, this is how big things can get taken down. So you want to make sure that you are reporting. If you do find that you are a victim of something, of fraud, you want to make sure that you are reporting that to the FTC. The Internet Crime Complaint Center, or IC3, is another place where you can file a complaint. The big thing to be aware of here is that they will basically be gathering that information. They personally or as an agency won't be moving anything forward. So what they would do is if you were to file a complaint here related to something that was specific to cybercrime, they would look at the information, but then they would send it to local, state, or federal agency to take action. So they wouldn't be taking action themselves, but it is a good place to do that additional reporting. And if you don't know what to do, if you're kind of confused and are kind of unsure, again, that report fraud or the identity theft, the identitytheft.gov are really great, but you can also use this survival toolkit from the Better Business Bureau. And it's kind of helpful because it addresses all different kinds of scams. And it can really kind of help you see, okay, what kinds of things are out there, but also if you have a scam that you think doesn't really line up to anything else, where you might be reporting or what you might be doing. So this is an additional resource that we like to share with folks. All right, so I want to give you all a second to ask any questions. I'm also going to scroll back up. I believe there was a question specifically about identity theft, but we are done with the presentation as it is for now. I believe we'll stop recording and then I'm happy to answer any questions.